Tonight I get to interview a very good, I have to say so many things about this man. I mean, I don't even know where to begin. It's an honor to sit here next to Mr. Griffiths, Arthur. I have for many years known about his work, followed who he was and who he is, and more recently gotten to know him as a person. And very approachable man, very interesting man, and thank you for being here with me.
My pleasure.
Thank you. So how I conduct my interviews is I don't really set questions. I base everything, my work, on curiosity. I try to take the thoughts that I have and try to convey them into questions and conversation, and tonight will be one of those conversations. So I thank you again for being here, and we'll start. So Arthur, let's start from the beginning. Where were you born, and where are you from?
I was born in Vancouver, BC.
Okay.
In fact, I was born at VGH because Lionsgate Hospital wasn't open yet.
Yeah.
It goes back that far.
Yeah.
If you want to get my age out of the way, it was 56.
Amazing. Yeah.
But family's Vancouver, grandfather, or my father
Yeah.
as well, and and my mother, of course. So
Yeah.
this is home.
It's so the Griffiths family. I mean, there's let's start with your grandfather and your father. Tell us a bit of the background, business and life, and where they came from.
Well, my father, my father's father, that is, and mother, grandmother, sorry, came from England, and he decided this was a little better lifestyle than middle of England in the late 1800s. So he moved here, and eventually my father was born here. So, but they were classic. Even what he did as a career before he came to Canada. My grandfather was an accountant. He worked on the ships as a purser. So he decided that he was going to get his Institute of British Columbia certificate as a CA. Had a son who decided it was a good idea to follow in his father's footsteps. They had a company for many, many years, for, gosh, probably 30 years. They were quite creative. Came up with the name Griffiths and Griffiths. And they had a nice little office that was very conveniently located. If you can appreciate the business back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, directly across the street from the Vancouver Club. So many of their clients were just sort of coming and going from the Vancouver Club and doing business. So it was a good way to trap people there on the golf course, I guess. And then my mother, which is some people know the story, but my mother was originally born in Saskatchewan, but moved here when she was about 18 months old, and she's got a wonderful story in her own right. Her father was a real pioneer in the sense of business. He was a veterinarian from Ontario. Dr. Ballard was his name. He decided to create a dog food empire, which he did, and for most of the people, well, a number of the people in this room, they've never heard of him, but he was the first to can dog food. He was the first to create a biscuit that a dog would chew because.
Do you guys know Dr. Ballard's? Yeah,
I
definitely do. I definitely heard of it. Yeah.
So yeah, so those are my parents and grandparents' beginnings, if you will.
And so when you were growing up, siblings?
One older brother, older sister, and a younger sister.
Yeah.
So we're all still around.
So you're a quintessential entrepreneur. I do know that about you. So were you entrepreneurial when you were younger?
Absolutely.
Talk about some of your first jobs and tell me how old you were. Yeah.
I guess my first job was probably, first of all, I've always liked to work. I don't care what it was. I don't care if it was, mowing the lawn or painting the boat or cleaning the boat or the car, whatever. So when I was about 14, I guess my first job was, believe it or not, was working in the kitchen at a fishing lodge up the coast. And then eventually I became a fishing guide because I grew up on the water, essentially, on this ocean here. Yeah. So and then I eventually, my first sort of job that paid reasonably well. I think it was well underpaid, but it was paid reasonably well. I went to
your standards, Arthur. Yeah, reasonably well.
Well, I went to I thought I could have done better, but it was a family business, so there was a way to keep the pay low. I worked for a radio station that we were part of in our business, and that was in Winnipeg. So I worked in Winnipeg for a summer and then here.
Let's talk about the media business and segue about the family business. As far as media, how did that start? Because we talked about accounting, but there's a media side to business.
You know, it goes to show you that whether lawyers, accountants, and others with an educational background. My father was a classic entrepreneur in that regard. He saw opportunity that many people never did, or if they did, it was usually too late. So he, in the 1950s, decided that there was a business that was attractive to him, and was the one that he understood the numbers as an accountant. And so he bought a radio station. It's referred to by some, not as many as it used to be, but the Giant 98. So CKNW was bought in 1957, then CFMI, and then he grew the business over the next 40 years to be at the, when my mother, my father passed away 20 years ago, but when my mother ultimately sold the business in 2000, it was the largest broadcasting company in the country, radio and television. So it was a really fascinating upbringing. I worked in the business for a while, and so it was a really, you know, the characters that are in this city, in the media business.
Such crazy people.
Yeah.
I've heard.
The evolution, the politics, the CRTC.
Yeah.
What an interesting education that was.
Now let's talk education. Were you going to school? Did you go to school, and what did you take, and what were your focuses when you were going to academia?
Well, initially I think I was attracted to sales and marketing, so I took sales and marketing at Capilano, and I just couldn't wait to work. I just couldn't wait to get into a job and get paid. Again, an entrepreneur. But then I finished my first 2 years, and my father says to me, you know, I don't think you've got enough of an accounting background. Of course, he would say that. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he goes, well, I think you should get some accounting. You should maybe be an accountant. And I said, I didn't say it to him, but of course I was listening, no way I was going to do that. So I decided that I would go to BCIT, and I did a finance degree there. That seemed to make him happy for a while. And so that was my sort of education. But clearly, as people, everybody experiences this, your real education is actually once you leave school.
Yeah.
Right? It's what you do with it, more importantly, what your instincts are, your passions are. So that's where I kind of got my education, still do.
Wow. There's a saying about a path that is chosen by somebody and something that's already chosen for you. You had a family influence, family business, done well. So you could have taken a path that was sort of given to you, or there could have been a path that you chose. And let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, frankly, within the family business, there was besides the media, we had a fairly reasonably well-known sports team.
Yeah, we'll talk about that too.
And so after I left the radio business, after a few years and graduated, my father said to me, what would you like to do? And he says, well, what business? And I said, well, to be honest with you, I really like the sports. And he goes, oh, no. Well, I said, I don't want to do radio. I've done that, and I don't really think that that's where I want to be. And then he goes, well, okay, well, what about TV? And I said, well, okay, but I still like the sports. And he goes, okay. So, any event, I got a sales and marketing job in the Vancouver Canucks in about 1980, and that meant all kinds of different things. It meant listening to abusive people say, when I asked them for their money for their season's tickets, not knowing it was me, although a few people figured that out, saying, whoa, just the ears would just burn. In the early days when my father owned the team, it was very, very small budget, relatively speaking, of course. In fact, I think our first payroll is probably what one hockey player or a few hockey players will make this year on the team. That said, it wasn't a bad decision on the business side, because frankly, when you have the media properties, so you got a radio station that carried the Canucks, and so on, and then there's the TV. So those are sort of natural synergies in business, but they don't operate like normal businesses. Sports teams typically, until more recently, do not operate like a normal business in terms of why you make the decision. The dispassionate decision that comes from owning a sports team doesn't exist. It's all heart and soul and passion.
Of course.
And you live and breathe it, and you get the good with the bad and so on. So it was really something that I just loved the idea. I loved the connectivity to the community. I loved I loved how, and I love how a sports team, any sports team, can take a city to a new place. The last time there was a building financed prior to that was 60 years earlier.
Wow.
So the bottom line was, though, Vancouver needed a new home for the team. We could not stay. It wasn't just the building; it was the location.
Yeah.
And don't let anybody tell you. And I can give you lots of examples. This is. You think I had a radio show? This is important to note when you build a team. You've got to have the building in the location where the people live and work, predominantly where they work, and hopefully where they live. So location is important. And so downtown Vancouver was where it was going to be. I then decided, and this is where it gets interesting, I said, you know, one team is nice, but I think Vancouver's grown up. I think we're ready. We're ready for the NBA. And I'm glad we got this opportunity to talk about the NBA for a minute, because it is not what people think. I can tell you what it is. The NBA granted this team to this city. They handcuffed the team on a number of levels. They had what they call an expansion agreement. Typically, an expansion agreement is just when you pay and how much. Not in this case. The NBA decided that they were going to learn from their previous expansion, where they were not going to allow a team to get successful, sounds crazy, too quickly. Because the previous expansion, there was the one team called the Orlando Magic, who went from non-existence to 3 championships in about 6 years. And the owners, who were quite resentful, said, we're not going to do that again, but we're going to charge more money, and we're going to make sure that those new teams cannot spend to the cap, which means you can't acquire the best talent. Secondly, you can't even acquire the best talent in the draft, which is the only way to build in the NBA, because the reality is they didn't want you to go out and get the next Michael Jordan or whoever it might be. So you had to wait. So it took us 5 years. Yeah. So it was sort of like having two arms tied behind your back. So that said, we still had a fan base, a great fan base. Yeah. We had 12,500 people per night, guaranteed. Some nights we were 18, 19, 20,000, or 18,000. And I tell you, that was the least of the Vancouver Grizzlies' problem. What happened is, when I sold everything, what I did was, my partner decided that there was an opportunity to, which was his right, to sell the team and make money. So he sold and pocketed quite a lot of money within 6 years. So he sold the team, decided it wanted only one team, and that was up to him to do. But it wasn't what people thought. Vancouver was fine. In fact, truth be known, 96, 97 to 98, the team that lost lots of money was the Canucks. The Grizzlies lost $2-3 million a year versus 15 or 18 or 19 million for the Canucks per year. So it was a nightmare. And remembering in hockey and in basketball in that mid 90s, there were lockouts and strikes. So there was always this start, stop. And in the early days in sport, in the 90s, nobody planned financially what you do if there's a work stoppage. The NHL, I think, has perfected it, sadly, but in one sense it's pretty shrewd, is they've said, we have a game plan, we have a battle plan. If we go to war, we're going to win, and we're going to win on every level. We're going to win financially, we're going to make sure that we don't spend to oblivion, and more importantly, we're not going to be obligated with expenses when the business is stopped. And that's what they've done and been successful at it.
So, I mean, from business to business, how do you decide what's successful and what's not going to be successful? And do you are you projecting numbers, or do you just say, like, you know what, this hockey's pretty popular. We have a huge opportunity here. We have the means to finance this. Mm-hmm. Let's go for it.
Yeah, there's no question that there was this recognition that Vancouver's identity, good and bad, can be in the sports world, is the Vancouver Canucks. So it's not like it's a business that's not going anywhere. It's here to stay, and if you do it right, what's really the one thing I love about the Canucks is that if it's done right, the team can be the greatest ambassador the city has. on a consistent and ongoing basis. So having the players go out into another city and to see the jerseys start to appear in the other team buildings and to hear, you know, the complaints that we used to hear, oh, for God's sakes, here come the Toronto Maple Leafs. When you hear that in Phoenix, and oh God, the Canucks are coming to town, that the kind of thing is kind of exciting to see as it's a measure of your team and your city and your respect almost. And so it was one of those decisions and one of those very, very, obviously very, very fortunate parts of my life was to be part of something that was you know, identified with your city globally. Tourism Vancouver current CEO, Rick Antonson, said to me, can you meet me from my office one day? And this was about December of 98 or 99. I should remember. That just says I'm getting old. So I remember going to his office, and he says, well, one of his colleagues comes in, he sits down, and then that time the head of the chairman of Tourism Vancouver came into the Mark Andrew, sat down, and he says to me, so we think it's time for Vancouver to bid for the 2010 Olympic Games. I said, I think you're right.
Yeah.
Basically, sitting looking out at those mountains,
Sure.
and they were just as dry as that. And I go, it was like, oh gosh. And then I said, well, yeah, what do you think? And he said, well, we'd like you to be the chairman of this to-be-created committee. And I said, all right, what does that really mean? And so it really meant the following: build a business plan, bring in the stakeholders, create the board, and then sell it to the Canadian Olympic Committee, who ultimately decides whether you are the best city to go international. It would be great if there were so many hurdles to overcome as anything worthwhile in this world there are. And the hurdles were the simple ones. There was convincing the members of the Canadian Olympic Committee, which are made up of winter and sport bodies, representatives. At the time, I think there were 78 of them. And we crisscrossed this country. We created a very good plan, and much of which was ultimately what was built and where. And so that was my next ride, if you will. And I can't tell you that there was many days that I didn't think I was the luckiest guy in Canada.
Yeah.
In about 1992, got a phone call from one of Vancouver's really legendary marketing gurus. He had an agency in Vancouver. You've probably heard of Frank Palmer, some of you. Well, one of his partners was a fellow by the name of George Jarvis, who used to be called Palmer Jarvis. Yeah. So George came to me, as he would, in a very casual manner, and he said, I want to bring you, I'd like to introduce you to this young lady. And she is a nurse. And I said, oh, great. So she comes into my office, she brings her Tupperware full of cookies, and my assistant said to me, would you like coffee? And she says, oh, I'll have tea. So she's diminutive. I can get away with saying that. And she brought in we sat and had cookies and tea. And she says to me, now, talk about off guard. Because I thought, well, she's just a sweet lady. And she says to me, I've got this idea. I'm an oncology nurse at Children's Hospital in Vancouver, and I have a vision to build a hospice for children. I said, well, what's that look like? And she says, but it has to be freestanding. Wow. I said, I'm not sure what you're really saying here, but she says to me, we'd like your support. I'm now building GM Place, just about to get a basketball team.
No big deal.
In fact, I think I had just done the deal to buy the land to build the building around that time. So it was a very, very tight time frame. In fact, we were all in a small little office in the Marine Building. And long story short, I said, well, let me think about this. And I'm like, so I got the material. I sat there for a while after she left, and I started to read it. And I looked around, I think, hospice for children. And then she did, she came back the next day, and she says, Arthur, I asked her to come back the next day, and I said, what do you think? And I said, we'll do it. And she goes, write a check? And I said, no, we're going to do it. She goes, what do you mean you're going to do it? I said, well, we will find the location, we will find the money, and we will build it. She's like, she just started to cry. She just started to weep. And I don't think I've ever seen her cry. And given what she does for a living, I don't think many people would be able to say that. It is more than a hospice for children, because what it does is it allows people who have children who are sick, obviously respite care, palliative care, understand what a hospice is. But secondly, most importantly, I think at the end of the day, you have to deal with the fact that they will die. And when they do, what comes from that is a whole slew of collateral damage. People, family members, students. You know, you've got a 10-year-old boy who's been going to school for 5 years, and his classmates and whatnot. So there's this outreach program that brings people into this, that allows you to grieve, be aware, and move on. And what ultimately happens is all of those people, not all, but many of them, become volunteers.
How do you want to be remembered? What is your legacy that you want to be remembered for?
Good guy.
Yeah.
It's always interesting for me to sort of, it's fascinating to me, because I sometimes think I'm living someone, when I look back at my life, and I look back at the Canucks, and I look back at where people talk to me, and they approach me and they go, wow, do you remember saying hello to me? Or I'm like, well, yeah, I do. Or maybe I don't, but point being is that they're shocked that I'd actually take the time to talk to them. Like,
That's right.
who doesn't? Why would you not? And for me, my enjoyment has been that interaction with everybody I meet. Not always pleasant, but for the most part, pretty good. And I'm very fortunate that I get a chance to interact like tonight, and to be part of this. To be honest with you, it's been a really interesting experience for me, because I'm reliving part of my life that, as I say, I feel like it wasn't even my life. I'm going, did you do that? You were there?
I'm sure we have videotapes somewhere of all those
you were
things.
there. You were there in '94. You were there when they broke ground in GM Place.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a very, very personal story that I didn't think I'd ever be saying this publicly, but the kind of person I am, and I mentioned the family, and I only had 4 children at this time, but when GM Place was opening in '94 or '95, in the summer of '94, they were pouring what's known as the slab, where the ice surface was. And I talked to the construction department, and I said, I'm going to come down from the office, which was across the street, more or less, up on Beatty Street. I said, I'm going to come down, and I've got something that I'm going to put underneath center ice. This is before anyone decided to put a loonie under an ice rink. But so I took a picture of my children, and my wife at the time, and I said the original dream team. And so this is a continuum pouring of slab that you cannot stop. If you stop, you get a ripple, and that's a problem. So I was instructed to be there at a certain time, 15 minutes early. I walk out onto this wood strut, out on the floor. Concrete's coming, and I wait till it gets close, and I slip it underneath. Concrete goes, and I walk off. And so I presume, unless they've had to replace the floor, which they might have, it's still there. But
Ladies and gentlemen, Arthur Griffith.
thank you. Thank you. Thanks very much.
I'm Tara Ferguson, and you're watching Tara Talking Tech. Tonight, Tara Talking Tech is on location at Science World to celebrate 20 years of tech, hosted by the BC Technology Industry Association. October 17th marked 20 years of tech for BC's largest industry association, the BCTIA, and according to the organization's Chief Operations Officer, Cindy Pearson, this is BC's time to shine.
The great news is that BC has got a big spotlight shining on it right now. We are at $500 million in investment, private placement right now at this point. It's about a 132% increase over this time last year. We're tracking to $1 billion investment by the end of the year, and we're actually beating out on a per head capita both Quebec and Ontario. So this is our time to shine, and this is our time to really come together and work as a community to get these companies doing what they need to do, which is grow and prosper.
Honorable Andrew Wilkinson, Minister of Technology, Innovation and Citizen Services, kicked off the evening's festivities. Andrew, what message do you have for future entrepreneurs in British Columbia?
Well, we're looking at a very promising environment here for technology entrepreneurs in the future. The tech sector where we are today is telling us now that it has never been better here. We've had dramatic growth over 25 years that continues and will continue into the future. We have a lot of talent here. There's good access to skilled management. And what we're doing through the BC Innovation Council is encouraging that kind of basic entrepreneurial mentorship throughout the province. So it's a very bright future here.
Over the past 20 years, BC has positioned itself as a leader in technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship, and I had a chance to chat with several local companies on the reasons behind their success and longevity here in BC.
I think there's been a lot of direction with the leadership of our company. The leadership has taken a stance and decided that in 2008 that we were going to move away from the automotive sector and move back into more commercial products. Backup Power Market has been really successful for us.
What are you guys doing differently that other organizations aren't doing?
I think a lot of it really comes down to the regulation that's at stake. A lot of luck. We're in the right place at the right time. Our software was built with purpose for the financial services sector, and as they face more problems, more scrutiny, our software is there to take advantage of that.
This is a great evening. We're having a wonderful time with 300 people from the BC Technology Industry Association, all of whom are contributing to making this an even better tech sector.
I agree. Thank you. Well, it's evident by tonight's turnout that British Columbia has certainly established itself as a tech hub here in Canada, and I am so excited for where the next 20 years will take us.